The snow fell heavy that February night, each flake adding weight to Clara Wynn's already burdened shoulders. She pulled her worn shawl tighter, though it did little against the Wyoming wind that cut through the thin wool like a butcher's knife through gristle. 28 years she'd lived, and now she owned nothing but what fit in the canvas sack bumping against her hip with each step. The letter in her coat pocket had promised work cooking for the Double Bar Ranch outside Cheyenne. Good wages, private quarters, respectable employment for a woman alone. She'd memorized every word during the 3-day journey by stage and wagon, clinging to those promises like a drowning soul to driftwood. But when she'd arrived at the address, she found only an abandoned barn and the bitter truth there was no Double Bar Ranch. Never had been. That was 2 days ago. 2 days of walking through deepening snow, following the wagon road back toward town. 2 days with nothing but melted snow in her belly and the growing certainty that she'd die out here, frozen stiff as the fence posts marking property lines she'd never own. The lights of Millbrook appeared through the snow like yellow eyes in the darkness. Not much of a town, maybe 24 buildings huddled along the main street, fighting the prairie wind for the right to stand, but it had warmth, food, and walls between her and the killing cold. Clara's boots, her father's boots. Too big but better than nothing, crunched through the frozen mud as she made her way down the street. The saloon's lights spilled brightest, and she could hear voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. Her stomach twisted, partly from hunger, mostly from what she was about to do. She'd thought about it all through the cold afternoon, turning the idea over like a stone in her pocket. She wasn't naive. She knew what some women did when they had nothing left to sell but themselves. She'd judged them once, back when she had a roof and regular meals and the luxury of principles. But principles didn't fill empty bellies or keep the cold from seeping into your bones. The saloon door was heavy oak, scarred from years of rough handling. Clara stood before it, gathering what remained of her courage. Inside, someone was playing a fiddle not well, but with enthusiasm. The music stopped when she pushed through. The warmth hit her first, so sudden and welcome her eyes watered. Then came the smell tobacco smoke, spilled beer, unwashed bodies, and underneath it all, the blessed scent of beef stew, her mouth flooded with saliva. The room wasn't large, maybe 12 tables, a bar along one wall, stairs leading up to whatever business happened on the second floor. Most of the tables were occupied by men in various states of drink and dirt, cowboys, by the look of them. Dusty hats, worn chaps, faces weathered by sun and wind into leather. Conversations died as they noticed her. A woman alone in a saloon meant one of two things, and Clara knew she didn't look like she was anyone's wife looking for her husband. She kept her eyes down, scanning for someone who might look kind, look rich, look desperate. She didn't know what she was looking for until she saw him. He sat alone at a corner table, back to the wall, nursing a whiskey. Unlike the others, he wasn't staring at her with speculation or hunger. He was cleaning his revolver with the methodical care of a man who understood that life often depended on well-maintained tools. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his shirt, while worn, was clean. When he glanced up at her intrusion, his eyes were gray as winter sky. Clara made her decision. She crossed to his table on legs that trembled from more than cold and exhaustion. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar on his jaw. Maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell with men who lived under open sky. She stood before his table, trying to find words that wouldn't shame her mother's ghost. The man his presence commanded respect, even sitting still, waited without speaking. The revolver parts lay organized on a clean cloth. "I need—" Clara's voice came out as a whisper. She cleared her throat. Tried again. "I need food and shelter." His gray eyes moved from her face to her snow-dampened clothes, to the canvas sack that held her worldly possessions. "Kitchen's through there," he said, nodding toward a door. "Might could get a plate from May." "I don't have money." A statement, not a plea. Clara had too much pride left for begging, though she suspected that would go too, given enough cold nights. The man reassembled his revolver with practiced movements. Around them, conversation slowly resumed, though she felt eyes on her still. "There's work to be had," he said. "Henderson's looking for someone to help with laundry. Watson needs help in his store." "I tried." The words came bitter. "Henderson wants someone younger. Watson wants references." She swallowed hard, tasted pride going down like broken glass. "I have something else to offer." The man's hand stilled on the gun. He looked at her then, really looked, and Clara forced herself to meet his gaze. Let him see what she was offering. Let him understand. "My bed," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "For a warm meal and a place to sleep. Just for tonight." The words hung between them like icicles, sharp and cold and fragile. Clara waited for him to smile, that smile she'd seen on other men's faces. Waited for him to stand, to take her arm, to lead her upstairs where her mother's teachings would become one more thing she'd lost. Instead, he holstered the revolver and stood slowly. Clara's heart hammered, but he didn't touch her. He moved past her to the bar, and she heard him order, "Bowl of stew, bread, coffee." A pause. "Make it hot." He returned to the table, pulled out a chair. "Sit." Clara sat because her legs wouldn't hold her much longer anyway. The man resumed his seat across from her. Neither spoke. The fiddle started up again, a mournful tune about Texas and lost love. When the food came carried by a woman whose painted face spoke of upstairs business, Clara's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the spoon. The first taste of beef and potatoes nearly made her sob. She ate slowly, forcing herself not to wolf it down like an animal. The man sipped his whiskey and said nothing. When the bowl was empty, when the bread was gone, when the coffee had warmed her from inside, Clara made herself look at him. Time to pay her debt. "The first night of a woman," he said quietly, "isn't something to bargain with. Least not with me." Heat flooded Clara's face. Shame burned hotter than the coffee in her belly. She'd offered the last thing of value she possessed, and even that wasn't wanted. "I don't—" She stopped, not sure what she meant to say. "I'm not trying to trick anyone. I know what I offered." "I know what you offered." His voice carried no judgment, just fact. "Question is, do you know why you offered it?" "Because I'm hungry. Because I'm cold. Because I don't want to die in a snowbank like an animal. Those are reasons for being here, not reasons for selling yourself." Clara's temper, dulled by cold and hunger, sparked to life. Easy words for a man with money for whiskey and bullets. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "True enough." He leaned back, studied her. "You got people." "No." "Skills." "I can cook, sew, keep house, read and cipher." She lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of hard work. Can see that by your hands." Clara looked down at them, reddened, calloused, nails broken, working hands. Not the soft hands of a woman who'd been protected all her life. "Name's Wyatt Calder," he said. "I run cattle about 10 miles north. Just came in for supplies." He paused, seemed to consider. "Got a crew needs feeding. Cook quit last week, couldn't handle the isolation." Hope, dangerous and sharp, pricked at Clara's chest. "You're offering me work." "Offering you a chance. Pays $20 a month plus board. You'd sleep in the kitchen, it's warm and has a bolt on the door. Nobody touches you without permission. And any man tries gets introduced to Wyoming justice." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You don't know me. I could be a thief. Could be running from the law." "Could be." He finished his whiskey. "But you're not. Thief wouldn't offer what you offered. Woman running from the law wouldn't give her real name." "I didn't give my name." "Clara Wynne." At her startled look, he almost smiled. "It's stitched on your bag." She looked down at the canvas sack, at her mother's careful embroidery. See Win in blue thread, faded but still readable. Ranch is hard living, Wyatt continued. Wind never stops blowing. Nearest town is here, 10 miles of bad road. You'd be cooking for 8 men who smell like horses on their best days. Winter's long, summer's brutal, and spring barely exists. Still better than freezing to death. This time he did smile, just a slight upturn of his lips. There's truth. He stood, left coins on the table. Got a room at the boarding house. You can have the floor tonight, missus. Patterson won't ask questions if I pay for it. Tomorrow, if you still want the job, we head out. Clara stood too, legs steadier now with food in her belly. Why are you helping me? Wyatt Calder looked at her for a long moment. Maybe because I know what it's like to have nothing left to sell but pride. Maybe because I need a cook. He shrugged. Maybe because any woman brave enough to walk into a saloon and offer what you offered deserves better than what she'd get from most men in here. He headed for the door. After a moment, Clara followed. What choice did she have? Outside, the snow still fell, but it no longer felt like a burial shroud. Just weather, just another thing to endure. As they walked through the frozen streets toward the boarding house, Clara thought about the turn her life had taken. This morning, she'd been ready to sell the last piece of herself she thought had value. Tonight, she had work, wages, a future that extended beyond the next meal. All because a man with gray eyes and steady hands had said no to her offer. She pulled her shawl tight and followed Wyatt Calder through the snow, leaving her desperation behind in the saloon's smoky warmth. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, cowboys and isolation and endless prairie wind. But tonight, she would sleep warm. Tonight, she still owned herself. And that, Clara thought as the boarding house lights appeared through the swirling snow, was worth more than she'd known. The boarding house floor had been harder than frozen ground, but warmer. Clara woke to gray dawn light filtering through muslin curtains and the sound of Wyatt Calder pulling on his boots. He'd given her 2 blankets and taken one for himself, sleeping by the door like a guard dog. She'd lain awake half the night, waiting for him to change his mind, to demand payment for his kindness, but he'd only snored softly, hat over his face. Now he stood, stretched, and looked down at her. Wagon leaves in an hour. You coming? Clara sat up, every muscle protesting, yes. He nodded and left to see about supplies. He said. Clara used the wash basin to clean her face and hands, tried to make her hair presentable. Her dress was wrinkled beyond help, but it was clean. She'd make do. She always had. The wagon waited outside the general store, loaded with sacks of flour, coffee, beans. 2 horses were tied to the back, a bay and a paint. Wyatt checked the load while Clara stood awkward in the morning cold, her breath clouding white. Can you ride? He asked. Some. Good. Might need it come spring roundup. He helped her onto the wagon seat the first time he'd touched her, and only her elbow, only for balance. Road's rough. Hold on. The 10 miles took 3 hours. The trail, calling it a road, was generous, wound through snow-covered hills and valleys that all looked the same to Clara. Wyatt handled the team with quiet competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks. That's Devil's Crown Rock Formation. Good marker if you get turned around. That grove there, cottonwoods, only trees for miles. Clara memorized everything. Knowledge was survival out here. The ranch, when it finally appeared, wasn't much to look at. A main house of logs and rough planks, smoke rising from the chimney. A bunkhouse, larger than the house. Barn, corrals, various sheds. All of it huddled against the base of a hill as if seeking shelter from the endless wind. Home sweet home, Wyatt said, and Clara couldn't tell if he was joking. Men emerged from the bunkhouse as the wagon rolled up 5, 6, 7 of them. Rough as the land that made them, they stared at Clara with curiosity and something else. Not the hungry look from the saloon, but wariness, as if she were a strange animal that might bite. Boys, Wyatt said, setting the brake. "This is Mrs. Wynne. She'll be cooking. Any man treats her with less than respect answers to me." "Mrs. Clara started to correct him, then understood. A widow was respectable. A spinster was suspect. "Ma'am." The youngest, barely out of his teens, touched his hat brim. Others followed suit, mumbling greetings. An older man, face like worn leather, spat tobacco juice. "Can she cook better than Dusty?" "A dead dog could cook better than Dusty," someone answered, and they all laughed. Wyatt helped Clara down, led her to the main house. The kitchen dominated the front room large stove, wooden tables scarred from years of use, shelves lined with dishes and pots. A narrow bed was pushed against one wall, quilt folded neat at the foot. "This is yours," Wyatt said. "That door leads to the main room, usually just me in there. Sometimes the foreman. This door," he indicated another, "goes outside. Like I said, it bolts from inside." Clara tested the bolt. Solid iron, well-oiled. "And the men?" "Eat in here, but sleep in the bunkhouse. They know the rules." He moved to the stove, checked the firebox. "I'll send Tommy the young one with wood. He's harmless. Anything you need, ask him or me." He started to leave, stopped. "Supper's at 6. They'll expect something filling." "Mr. Calder," Clara made herself meet his eyes. "Last night, what I offered, I need to know that it's finished, that you won't—" "I won't." His voice was quiet, but firm. "What you offered in that saloon stays in that saloon. Here, you're the cook. Nothing more, nothing less." Clara nodded. Throat tight, he left, and she stood alone in what would be her domain. The stove was cold. She'd fix that first, then inventory what she had to work with. Then she'd cook the best meal these cowboys had ever tasted, because Wyatt Calder had given her dignity when she'd been ready to sell it cheap. And that was a debt worth repaying. The wood arrived within minutes, carried by Tommy, the boy man, really. But his smooth cheeks made him seem younger, stacked it neat by the stove. "Ma'am, mister, Calder says to tell you there's a root cellar out back, potatoes and such down there. Smokehouse too, plenty of beef." "Thank you, Tommy." He blushed, red as sunset. "Welcome, ma'am. Real glad to have decent cooking again. Dusty near poisoned us with his last stew." Clara found herself almost smiling. "I'll do my best." After he left, she explored her resources. The root cellar was well-stocked potatoes, carrots, turnips, onions. The smokehouse held quarters of beef, haunches of venison, even a ham. Basic ingredients, but she'd worked with less. She built up the fire, set water to heating, and got to work. Beef stew seemed safest filling, warming, hard to ruin. She browned chunks of meat in the big pot, added vegetables cut uniform, seasoned with what she found: salt, pepper, dried sage. While it simmered, she mixed biscuit dough, her mother's recipe, the one thing of value her father couldn't take away. The familiar rhythm of kneading soothed something in her chest. By 5:30, the kitchen smelled like home. Not her recent home that had been taken, but the home of her childhood, when her mother was alive and the world made sense. The men filed in just before 6, hat in hand, awkward as schoolboys. They'd washed faces and hands at least, and someone had slicked his hair with pomade. Clara hid a smile. How long since they'd had a woman's cooking? Wyatt came last, taking a seat at the head of the table. He looked at the spread stew thick with meat and vegetables, biscuits, golden brown, coffee strong enough to float horseshoes, and nodded approval. "Gentlemen," he said, "mind your manners." They ate like starving wolves, trying to be polite about it. Silence except for scraping spoons and appreciative grunts. The biscuits disappeared. The stew pot emptied. When Tommy reached for his third helping, the older man introduced as Hank. The foreman cuffed him gentle. "Save some for tomorrow, boy." "There's more," Clara said. "I made plenty." They stared at her like she'd announced Christmas had come early. After they'd eaten their fill, after she'd served dried apple pie she'd managed from stores, the men filed out with mumbled thanks and genuine smiles, all except Wyatt, who lingered. That was fine, he said. Better than fine. Clara washed dishes, aware of him watching. It's just stew. Out here, just stew can mean the difference between men staying or moving on come spring. He stood, reached for his hat. You need anything, you ask. Don't be proud about it. Mr. Calder. Clara turned from the wash basin. Why did you really help me the truth this time? He paused at the door. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my sister. She was about your age when she found herself in similar circumstances. No family, no money, nowhere to go. His jaw tightened. She didn't find someone to say no, didn't live out the winter. The words hung heavy as wet snow. Clara didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. The first night of a woman isn't something to bargain with. Wyatt repeated his words from the saloon. Not because it doesn't have value, but because it has too much. Once gone, it's gone. Better to go hungry than sell yourself cheap to men who see you as nothing but a warm body. He left then, pulling the door firm behind him. Clara stood in her kitchen and let the tears come. Not from sadness, but from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming realization that she'd walked to the edge of a cliff and been pulled back by a man who understood the cost of falling. She dried her eyes, banked the fire, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring breakfast for 8 hungry men, then dinner, then supper, an endless cycle of cooking and cleaning and making do. But tonight, she had a full belly and a warm bed and a bolt on her door. Tonight, she was Clara Wynne, cook at the Calder ranch, earning honest wages for honest work. And that, she thought as she pulled the quilt to her chin, was worth more than anything she'd been prepared to sell in that saloon. The first night of a woman wasn't a bargaining chip. It was a gift, to be given freely or not at all. Wyatt Calder had taught her that with a bowl of stew and a hard floor and a simple no. She'd spend the rest of winter proving she'd learned the lesson. The barn was warmer than she'd expected. Clara had slept in worse places during her journey to Wyoming. But this, with fresh straw piled deep in clean horse blankets that smelled of leather and hay, this was almost comfortable. Almost. She'd lasted exactly 1 night in the kitchen before the walls closed in. Not from fear, but from something else. The kindness, maybe. The way Wyatt had left extra wood by the stove without being asked. The way young Tommy had stammered, "Thank you, ma'am," after every meal. It was too much, too soon, after being so close to losing everything. So she'd asked Wyatt if she might sleep in the barn instead. Just for a while. Just until she could breathe again without feeling like she owed the world for every breath. He'd studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Barn's warm enough. Take what blankets you need. That had been 3 days ago. 3 days of cooking meals that disappeared fast as she could serve them. 3 days of learning each man's preferences. Hank liked extra pepper. Tommy could eat his weight in biscuits. The one called Red wouldn't touch carrots. And Wyatt ate whatever she put in front of him with quiet appreciation. Always last to sit, first to leave. Now, lying in the hayloft with the moonlight streaming through gaps in the boards, Clara listened to the horses below shifting in their stalls. The barn cat, a massive orange tom the men called General, had curled against her side, purring like distant thunder. She'd never had a pet, another luxury the poor couldn't afford. A board creaked. Clara sat up, heart racing, but it was only Wyatt checking on a mare due to foal. She could see him through gaps in the loft floor, moving slow and careful in the lamplight. He spoke soft to the horse, words she couldn't make out, and something in her chest tightened at the gentleness of it. She must have made a sound because he looked up. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You can't seem to sleep sound anymore." He went back to the mare, running practiced hands along her sides. "Come morning, you might want to move back inside. Storm coming, can smell it on the wind." I'm fine here. Wasn't a suggestion. His voice stayed mild, but there was steel underneath. Temperature drops like I think it will. You'll freeze up there. Bad enough I let you stay out here at all. Let me. Clara felt her spine stiffen. I wasn't aware I needed permission. You don't, but I need a cook, not an ice sculpture. He patted the mare's neck. Pride's a cold bedfellow. Mrs. Wynne. The false title stung, reminder of the lie that protected her reputation. Speaking from experience. Every day. He picked up the lamp. Morning comes early. Best get some rest. He left, taking the light with him. Clara lay back down, but sleep was gone. She thought about pride, about cold, about the difference between walls that protected and walls that trapped. Come morning, the storm hadn't hit yet, but the air had teeth. Clara built up the kitchen fire until the stove glowed red, mixed flapjack batter with numb fingers. The men stomped in trailing snow and ice crystals, faces raw from checking cattle in the wind. Gonna be a bad one, Hank announced, warming his hands by the stove. Seen the signs, cattle bunching up, birds gone quiet. Wyatt came in last, ice in his beard. After breakfast, we'll move the weakest stock closer to shelter. Tommy, you help Mrs. Wynne bring in extra supplies from the root cellar. Don't want her going out once this hits. Clara served flapjacks and bacon, kept the coffee coming. The men ate quick, energized by urgency. Storm preparation was serious business out here, where help was 10 miles of impassable road away. Tommy helped her haul in potatoes, preserved goods, extra flour. His chatter filled the space between trips. Worst storm I seen. Snow drifted clear to the roof. Lost near 20 head that winter. Mr. Calder didn't sleep for 3 days straight, trying to save them. How long have you worked here? 2 years come spring. Mr. Calder took me on when nobody else would. Said I reminded him of someone. The boy flushed. I wasn't much good at first. Couldn't rope. Couldn't hardly stay on a horse. But he was patient. Taught me everything. Clara thought of Wyatt's sister. Wondered if this was penance or just kindness. By noon, the sky had gone yellow-gray, and the wind howled like something alive and angry. The men secured everything that might blow away, moved horses into the barn, checked and double-checked the cattle in the near pasture. Clara cooked a big pot of beans with salt pork, made enough cornbread for 3 days. No telling how long they'd be snowed in. She was pulling the last pan from the oven when the storm hit proper. It came like a wall, visibility dropping to nothing in seconds. The kitchen windows went white. The walls shook. Somewhere, a door banged open and shut. The men crowded in for supper, stomping snow from boots, face red and raw. That's it, Hank declared. Nothing to do now but wait it out. They ate in relative quiet, the storm making conversation difficult. After, instead of heading to the bunkhouse, they lingered. Tommy produced a worn deck of cards. Red pulled out a harmonica. Even Wyatt stayed, taking his usual chair by the fire. Play us something cheerful. Red. Hank suggested. Lord knows we need it. Red obliged with a lively tune that had Tommy tapping his feet. The kitchen felt different with all of them there, smaller but warmer too. Like a real home. Clara washed dishes, listening to the music and the storm and the men's occasional laughter. When she turned from the basin, she found Wyatt watching her. He looked away quick, but not before she saw something in his expression. Concern. Maybe, or something else. You should get some rest, he said. Tomorrow will be long. What about you? I'll check the barn once more. Make sure the horses are settled. In this, she gestured at the windows, completely white now. You can't see your hand in front of your face. Rope strung from house to barn. Been through worse. He bundled into his coat, wrapped a scarf around his face until only his eyes showed. At the door, he paused. Bolt this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Why would I? Just do it! Then Softer, please! She bolted the door, listened to his footsteps fade into the storm's roar. The other men were absorbed in their cards, but she couldn't settle. She paced the kitchen, added wood to the fire, paced some more. Time stretched. How long did it take to check horses? The storm seemed to grow louder, angrier. Clara pressed her face to the window but saw only white. A thump at the door made everyone look up. Then Wyatt's voice, muffled. "It's me." Clara fumbled with the bolt, pulled the door open. He stumbled in on a blast of snow and wind, ice coating every surface. His scarf had frozen solid. "Damn fool thing to do," Hank muttered, helping him to the fire. "Could have waited till morning. Mare's foaling." Wyatt's teeth chattered. "Needs watching." Clara brought coffee, held it steady while he drank. His hands shook too hard to manage alone. This close. She could see ice crystals in his eyelashes, the blue tinge to his lips. "You'll go back out there over my dead body," Hank said. "That mare's survived worse without you playing nursemaid." For once, Wyatt didn't argue. He sat by the fire, slowly thawing, while the storm raged on. The other men returned to their cards, but Clara stayed close. She told herself it was in case he needed more coffee. "Thank you," he said, quiet enough only she could hear. "For coffee, it's my job. For opening the door. For worrying." His gray eyes found hers. Been a long time since anyone worried. Something passed between them in that look. Not the desperate bargain she'd offered in the saloon. Not the careful distance they'd maintained since. Something warmer, built on 3 days of shared meals and small kindnesses and the simple fact that she'd paced the floor while he was in the storm. Clara looked away first. "Drink your coffee before it gets cold." But she stayed near, and when the men finally headed to the bunkhouse through the tunnel, Hank and Red Doug Wyatt was last to go. "Sleep inside tonight," he said. "That's not pride talking. That's sense." This time, Clara didn't argue. The hayloft had been a retreat. But tonight, with the storm trying to tear the world apart, the kitchen felt like the only safe place in Wyoming. She banked the fire, checked the bolt, and crawled into the narrow bed fully clothed. The storm howled on, but the walls held. The stove's warmth reached just far enough. And somewhere in the white blind night, a mare labored to bring new life into the world while a man who'd walked into a blizzard to check on her slept one thin wall away. Clara pulled the quilt higher and closed her eyes. Tomorrow there would be snowdrifts to dig through, animals to feed, men to cook for. But tonight, she was warm and safe and strangest of all home. The barn could wait. Pride could wait. For now, this was enough. 2 weeks after the storm, Clara had found her rhythm. Up before dawn to start the fire. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Biscuits in the oven while bacon sizzled. The men stumbled in at first light, grateful for hot food before facing another day of digging out cattle and mending fences. She wasn't the fragile thing they'd expected. That became clear the morning she helped Tommy haul water when the pump froze. Her shoulders were broad from years of real work, washing, hauling, lifting. Her hands, already rough when she arrived, grew rougher still from lye soap and hot dishwater. When Red sliced his palm on barbed wire, she stitched it neat as any doctor, steady-handed despite his cursing. "Where'd you learn that?" Hank asked, watching her work. "My mother. She said a woman should know how to mend anything clothes, wounds, or broken spirits." The men started seeing her different after that. Not as some delicate flower to tiptoe around, but as someone who could pull her weight. When she asked Tommy to teach her to milk the 2 cows they kept for butter and cream, nobody laughed. When she helped fork hay to the horses during another freeze, Wyatt just handed her gloves without comment. But respect was one thing, the laughter was another. It started the day she told Red his whistling could scare paint off a barn. The men had frozen, waiting to see how he'd take it. Then Red had grinned wide and whistled louder, deliberately off-key, until even stern Hank cracked a smile. Woman's got sand, Red declared. I like that. After that, the kitchen became less formal. The men told stories during meals about ornery horses, barroom fights, the time Tommy got chased up a tree by a bull. Clara found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. She noticed things about them now. How Hank carved little wooden figures when his hands needed busy work. How Red's harmonica playing improved when he thought nobody was listening. How Tommy read every book he could get his hands on, sounding out the hard words under his breath. And Wyatt? Wyatt she tried not to notice. But it was impossible when he was always there fixing a loose board on the steps, bringing in extra wood before she asked, staying late to help dry dishes when the others had gone. You don't need to do that, she told him one evening, taking a plate from his hands. I can manage. I know you can. He dried another plate, careful and thorough. Maybe I like the quiet. They worked in companionable silence, the kitchen warm with steam and lamplight. Outside, March wind rattled the windows, not the killing cold of February, but still bitter. Spring's coming, Wyatt said. Another month, maybe less. And then, roundup, branding, moving cattle to summer pasture. He set the dried plate on the shelf. Busiest time of year. Clara heard what he didn't say. The men would be gone for days at a time. She'd be alone here with the wind and the work. I'm not afraid of being alone, she said. Didn't think you were. He hung the dish towel neat on its hook. But there's a difference between not being afraid and being ready. Before she could ask what he meant, Tommy burst through the door. Mr. Calder. That new bull's broken through again. He's heading for the mare's paddock. Wyatt was out the door in seconds. Clara forgotten. She watched through the window as the men chased the bull through the moonlight, their shouts carrying on the wind. It was almost comic grown men running from an animal that had no interest in them, only in the mare on the other side of the fence. When they finally got the bull contained, the men trooped back muddy and winded. Clara had coffee waiting. Damn bull's got spring fever early, Hank grumbled. Gonna be a long season if he keeps this up. Maybe he's just lonely, Tommy suggested, then blushed red when the others laughed. Lonely, Red snorted. That's one way to put it. Clara felt her own cheeks warm, but kept her attention on the coffee pot. She was a widow, supposedly. She should be worldly about such things. Speaking of lonely, Hank said, my sister's coming to visit next month. Lives in Cheyenne. She's been after me to introduce her to some respectable ranchers. He gave Wyatt a meaningful look. Your sister's got 2 kids and a mean right hook, Wyatt said. I'll pass. She's also pretty as a picture and cooks almost as good as Mrs. Wynn here. Nobody cooks as good as Mrs. Wynn, Tommy said loyally. The compliment warmed Clara more than it should have. She busied herself with the cups, aware of Wyatt watching her. Maybe Mrs. Wynn would like some female company. Hank continued. Must get tiresome, surrounded by nothing but smelly cowboys all day. I don't mind, Clara said. You all smell better than the rendering plant where I worked one summer. That got another laugh. Red started a story about the worst job he'd ever had, and the conversation moved on. But Clara noticed Wyatt stayed quiet the rest of the evening, staring into his coffee like it might hold answers. After the others left, he lingered. Hank means well, he said, about his sister. I'm sure she's lovely. She is. She's also husband hunting, and Hank thinks I've been alone too long. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Wyatt had never mentioned a wife, but that didn't mean there hadn't been one. Have you, she asked finally, been alone too long? He considered the question. There's alone and there's lonely. They're not the same thing. He stood, reached for his hat. I was lonely in a house full of people once. Now I'm alone, but... He stopped, shook his head. Never mind. Too late for philosophy. At the door, he turned back. You've brought something to this place. Clara, I mean Mrs. Wynne, the men, they're lighter. Does that make sense? It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his rough voice made her stomach flip. I just cook, she said. No. His gray eyes were serious. You do more than that. You make this feel less like a bunkhouse and more like, well, like somewhere worth coming back to. He left before she could respond. Clara stood in her kitchen, hands pressed to her warm cheeks. This wasn't what she'd planned. She'd wanted work, wages, survival. Not this warmth in her chest when a quiet man said her name. Not this feeling of belonging that grew stronger every day. She thought about the woman she'd been a month ago, desperate enough to sell herself for a meal. That woman seemed like a stranger now. This Clara, the one who could make 8 cowboys mind their manners, who could stitch wounds and milk cows and laugh at crude jokes without blushing. This Clara was someone new. Or maybe not new. Maybe just someone who'd been waiting all along for a chance to exist. She banked the fire and prepared for bed. But sleep was slow coming. Through the thin walls, she could hear the men in the bunkhouse, Red's harmonica playing soft and sweet, the low rumble of voices, occasional laughter. And somewhere, in his room on the other side of the kitchen wall, Wyatt Calder sat awake too. She knew because she could see lamplight under the door, could hear the occasional creak of his chair. What was he thinking about spring coming? His sister who'd died rather than accept help. The woman in his kitchen who'd almost made the same choice. Clara turned her face to the pillow. These were dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position. She was the cook. He was her employer. Anything else was a complication neither of them could afford. But when morning came and Wyatt smiled at her over his coffee, a real smile that reached his eyes, Clara felt that warmth in her chest again. And when Tommy complimented her biscuits and Red played a morning tune, and Hank carved a tiny horse while waiting for breakfast, she thought maybe complications weren't always bad. Maybe, sometimes, they were just life happening when you weren't looking. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, flooding the kitchen with light. Spring was coming. Change was coming. And Clara Wynne, who'd arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and desperation in her heart, was ready for whatever came next. She served up breakfast to her boys when had she started thinking of them as hers and hummed along with Red's harmonica. Through the window, she could see the mountains in the distance, snow-capped and eternal. This was her place now. These rough men were her people. And that quiet man who noticed too much and said too little, well, time would tell what he would become. For now, it was enough to be Clara Wynne, cook at the Calder ranch, a woman who'd kept her dignity when she'd had nothing else to keep. A woman who'd learned that some things, pride, self-worth, the respect of good men weren't for sale at any price. The pot was heavier than she'd expected. Clara had filled it too full, eager to have enough stew for the men who'd been working since dawn. Her hands, slick with grease from the morning's bacon, betrayed her. The massive iron pot tilted, and she saw it happening slow as molasses, the boiling liquid heading for her legs, her feet, a disaster in motion. Then Wyatt was there. He'd been fixing the loose door hinge, she thought. But suddenly, his hands caught the pot's edge alongside hers. Together they steadied it, boiling stew sloshing dangerous but contained. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen. His hands covered hers on the pot handles, rough and warm and steady. She could smell leather and wood smoke, could feel the heat from his body where he pressed close behind her to help bear the weight. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a spooked horse. Easy, he murmured, and she wasn't sure if he was talking about the pot or something else. On 3, we'll set it back on the stove. They moved together, careful and synchronized, until the pot sat safe on the iron surface. But his hands stayed over hers a moment longer than necessary. Clara felt that touch all the way to her bones. You hurt. He stepped back, putting proper distance between them. But his eyes scanned her for injury. No, I'm fine. Thank you. Could have been bad. His jaw was tight. Burns are nothing to take light out here. I know, I was careless. We all are. Sometimes. Something in how he said it made her wonder if they were still talking about the pot. He went back to the door hinge, and Clara returned to her cooking. But the kitchen felt different now. Charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Every time she moved past him to reach a shelf or stir the stew, she was aware of him, the space he took up, the careful way he kept himself just out of accidental touching distance. Tommy burst in around noon, tracking mud. "Mrs. Wynne, you gotta see the mare had her foal." Clara looked to Wyatt, who was putting his tools away. A half smile tugged at his mouth. "Go on. Stew won't burn in 10 minutes. She followed Tommy to the barn, where the other men had gathered around a stall. Inside, a bay mare nosed at a tiny copy of herself, all legs and curiosity, coat still damp from birth. "She's perfect," Clara breathed. The foal tried to take a step, wobbled, and its mother steadied it with her muzzle. "Born at dawn," Hank said. "No trouble at all. Unlike her papa, that bull-headed stallion nearly kicked down his stall when he heard her calling." Clara watched the foal find its feet, charmed by its determination. "What will you call her?" "That's Mr. Calder's choice." Red said, "His mare." Wyatt had followed them in, standing quiet at Clara's shoulder. "What do you think?" he asked her. "You've earned naming rights, keeping us all fed." Clara studied the foal brown with a white star on her forehead. "Star seems too common. What about Morning Glory for being born at dawn?" "Glory." Tommy tested the name. "I like it." "Glory it is," Wyatt agreed. His hand brushed Clara's shoulder as he moved past her to check the mare. Accidental, surely, but Clara felt it like a brand. They watched the foal a while longer before returning to their work. Clara served up the stew none the worse for its near disaster, and the men talked horses through the meal. But she kept remembering those few seconds of shared weight, shared warmth, shared purpose. After lunch, while washing dishes, she heard Wyatt and Hank talking on the porch, their voices carried through the open window. "You're playing with fire," Hank said. "Woman like that, working in your house?" "Nothing improper's happened." "Maybe not, but I've seen how you look at her, how she looks back when she thinks nobody's watching." Clara's hands stilled in the dishwater. "She's had enough trouble." Wyatt's voice was firm. "I won't add to it. Maybe she doesn't see it as trouble. Maybe she sees it as something else. Doesn't matter what she sees or what I see. What matters is what's right. She works for me. That makes her off limits." "Your sister didn't see it that way, with that foreman at the Double Cross." Silence, then Wyatt's voice, cold as January. "And look how that ended." Footsteps moved away. Clara resumed washing, her mind churning. So there had been someone, a foreman, who'd taken advantage of Wyatt's sister. No wonder he was so careful about boundaries. But Hank was right, too. She did look at Wyatt when she thought no one noticed, watched how he handled the horses with patient strength, how he carved wood in the evenings, hands creating delicate beauty from rough pine, how he smiled rare but real when Tommy mastered some new skill. She was looking now, through the window, as he worked with the new foal. His movements were slow and gentle, teaching the little creature to trust human hands. There was something healing in watching such a strong man being so tender. "You're gonna wash the pattern clean off that plate." Clara jumped. Red stood in the doorway, grinning. "Sorry, wool gathering." "Nice view for it," Red said, nodding toward the window. "Man's got away with horses?" Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "I was watching the foal." "Sure you were." But Red's teasing was gentle. "Nothing wrong with appreciating a good view. Mrs. Wynne, Lord knows we've been appreciating having you here to pretty up the place." "Red." "Not like that," he said quick. "I mean, well, you've made this place nicer. Curtains on the windows, flowers in that jar. Even got Tommy to wash regular. It's good, having a woman's touch around." Clara didn't know what to say. She'd added those small touches without thinking: wildflowers picked during a walk, feed sack curtains sewn in the evening. Little things to make the kitchen feel less like a workplace and more like home. Anyway, Red continued, just wanted to say we're glad you're here. All of us. He paused. Some may be gladder than others. He left before she could respond. Clara returned to her dishes, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the man teaching a foal to trust, to hands that had covered hers with such careful strength. Dangerous thoughts. Hank was right, this was playing with fire. She'd come here with nothing, built a respectable position through hard work, to risk that for feelings that might be one-sided. But then she remembered the lingering touch on the pot handles, the way he'd said her name that night, the careful distance he maintained that spoke of awareness, not indifference. The afternoon passed in ordinary tasks. She baked bread, mended Tommy's torn shirt, started bean soaking for tomorrow. Normal things that kept her hands busy while her mind wandered paths better left unexplored. When supper time came, Wyatt was last to table as always, but when she set his plate down, he caught her wrist, gentle, but she felt the calluses on his palm. About earlier, he said quiet. With the pot, I should have fixed that loose board by the stove. You could have been hurt because I put it off. The other men were arguing about something, not paying attention. Clara looked down at his hand on her wrist. It wasn't your fault. I'm responsible for everyone on this ranch. That includes keeping you safe. I'm not made of glass. Mr. Calder, I don't need protecting. I know. He released her wrist, but the warmth lingered. That's what makes it harder. She didn't ask what he meant. She thought she knew. It was easier to keep distance from someone who needed protecting. Harder when they stood on their own feet, looked you in the eye as an equal. The men finished supper and scattered to evening chores. Clara cleaned up, hyper-aware of Wyatt still at the table, carving something small from a piece of oak. My mother loved morning glories, he said suddenly. Planted them every spring, even when we barely had water for vegetables. Said beauty was necessary as bread sometimes. She sounds wise. She would have liked you. I think you're both practical and... He paused, focused on his carving. And you both find ways to make things beautiful without fuss. Clara's throat tightened. That's a kind thing to say. It's a true thing. He held up what he'd been carving, a tiny horse, captured mid-gallop. For your windowsill, to remember Glory's first day. Their fingers brushed as he handed it to her. This time, neither pulled away quick. They stood there in the lamplight, his carved gift in her palm, something shifting between them like spring ice breaking on a river. Wyatt, she started, not sure what she meant to say. But bootsteps on the porch broke the moment. Tommy burst in, excited about something with the cattle, and Wyatt stepped back to proper distance. Thank you, Clara managed. For the carving. He nodded and followed Tommy out, leaving Clara alone with her racing heart and a tiny wooden horse that somehow said everything he couldn't. She set it on the windowsill where morning light would find it. Such a small thing, but out here, where gestures mattered more than words, it felt like a declaration. Clara touched the carving once more, then returned to her dishes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she had this, the memory of steady hands over hers, a carved horse catching lamplight, and the growing certainty that she wasn't the only one fighting feelings that had no safe place to grow. Sometimes the most dangerous fires were the ones that burned slow and quiet, building heat until everything changed. Jake McGraw rode in with the supply wagon on a Tuesday that smelled like rain coming. Clara recognized the type before he opened his mouth, the kind of man who wore his gun low and his opinions loud. She'd served plenty like him in her short time at the ranch, drifters who stopped for a meal and moved on. But McGraw was different. He knew Wyatt. Well, McGraw said, swinging down from the wagon. Wyatt Calder's got himself a woman cooking. Never thought I'd see the day. Wyatt emerged from the barn, and something in his face went careful and still. Jake, been a while. 2 years, by my count. Not since that business in Laramie. McGraw's eyes found Clara in the kitchen doorway. And who might this be? Mrs. Wynne, our cook. Mrs. Wynne, Jake McGraw. He'll be staying for supper and moving on. The emphasis on moving on was subtle but clear. McGraw grinned like it was a joke between them. At supper, McGraw held court, telling stories that got bigger with each whiskey Red poured. Clara kept the food coming and her mouth shut, but she felt McGraw's eyes following her around the kitchen. Good food, he declared, pushing back his empty plate. Almost worth marrying for. That how Calder got you out here, promise of marriage? I'm already a widow, Clara said evenly. And Mr. Calder hired me for my cooking, nothing else. That's so. McGraw's smile was unpleasant. Heard tell there was a woman in Millbrook couple months back, desperate enough to sell anything for a meal. Wouldn't be you, would it? The kitchen went quiet. Tommy looked confused. Red and Hank exchanged glances. Wyatt set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. You're mistaken, Clara said, though her cheeks burned. Am I? Bartender said she offered her bed for food. Said Wyatt here turned her down. Took her in anyway. McGraw leaned back, enjoying himself. Gotta wonder what changed his mind, or maybe what she's paying him back with now. Wyatt's fist connected with McGraw's jaw before he could finish. The chair went over backward. McGraw with it. He came up swearing, hand going for his gun. Clara moved without thinking. She stepped between them, facing McGraw. Yes, I was desperate. Yes, I offered the only thing I thought I had left. And yes, Mr. Calder was decent enough to refuse. Her voice shook, but she kept going. I'm not ashamed of being hungry. I'm not ashamed of wanting to survive. But I am ashamed that men like you think desperation makes a woman fair game for your filthy speculation. McGraw wiped blood from his mouth, eyes ugly, high and mighty for a woman who was ready to... To what? Clara stepped closer. To make a bad bargain because I thought I had no choice, mister. Calder showed me I did have choices. I work here. I earn my wages with honest labor. And if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me. Not hide behind innuendo like a coward. You gonna let your woman talk to me like that? McGraw asked Wyatt. She's not my woman. She's her own woman. And she's right, you're a coward who gets pleasure from kicking people who are already down. McGraw's hand twitched toward his gun again. Every man in the room tensed. Go ahead, Clara said quietly. Shoot an unarmed woman for telling the truth. That'll be a story to brag about in the saloons. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then McGraw laughed, harsh and bitter. You always did like your strays. Wyatt, first that broken-down kid in Laramie, now her, just remember what happened to the last woman you tried to save. Get out! Wyatt's voice was deadly quiet. Get out and don't come back! McGraw gathered his hat, his dignity in tatters. At the door, he turned. This ain't over. Yes, it is. Wyatt's hand rested on his own gun now. You come near this ranch again, you'll meet more than fists. After McGraw left, the kitchen felt too small, too quiet. The men mumbled excuses and filed out, leaving Clara alone with Wyatt. She started gathering plates with shaking hands. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have. Don't. He caught her hands, stilling them. Don't apologize for standing up to scum like McGraw. But now they all know. What I was willing to do. They'll think you're a survivor. Nothing wrong with that. Clara looked at their joined hands. What happened in Laramie with the kid? Wyatt released her, stepped back. Boy about Tommy's age. Caught stealing. McGraw wanted to hang him. I stopped it. Gave the kid a job instead. He's doing well now. Has his own spread up north. And your sister McGraw said... McGraw says a lot of things. His jaw tightened. My sister trusted the wrong man, foreman at a ranch where she worked, when she found herself in trouble. He laughed, said she should have known better than to give it away free. Wyatt's eyes were dark with old pain. She took poison rather than face the shame, died thinking she was worthless because one man told her so. Clara's throat ached. I'm sorry. So am I. Sorry I couldn't help her see she had value beyond what men thought of her. He met Clara's eyes. That's why I couldn't let you make that bargain. You're worth more than a meal and a bed for the night. Worth more than what desperate circumstances tried to make you believe. I know that now. Thanks to you. No, thanks to you. I just offered a job. You're the one who took it. Made something of it. The men respect you. Hell, they'd probably mutiny if you left. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Tommy especially. Boy thinks you hung the moon. Just Tommy. The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Wyatt went very still. Clara. I know. She turned back to the dishes. You're my employer. I'm your cook. That's all. That's not... He stopped, seemed to struggle with words. If circumstances were different. But they're not. No, they're not. He moved toward the door, paused. McGraw was wrong about me collecting strays. The people I help, they're not charity cases. They're people I see something in, strength, potential, the ability to become more than their worst moment. What do you see in me? Clara asked softly. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, everything. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Clara stood in her kitchen, hands in cooling dishwater, heart hammering against her ribs. One word. Everything. It held promises too dangerous to examine, feelings too complicated to unravel. Outside, she heard Wyatt talking to the men, his voice carrying on the night air, making sure they understood McGraw wasn't welcome back, making sure they knew Clara's position here was secure. Protecting her reputation even as that one word everything threatened to undo them both. She dried the last dish and banked the fire. Tomorrow McGraw would spread his poison in town, telling anyone who'd listen about Wyatt Calder's woman, the one who'd tried to sell herself. There would be looks, whispers, judgments. But tonight, Clara had faced down a bully and won. She'd claimed her past without shame, defended her present without apology. And Wyatt had stood with her, not as a savior, but as an equal. She touched the little carved horse on the windowsill. Everything. Such a big word from such a careful man. Through her window, she could see him checking the horses one last time, a shadow moving through shadows. He'd probably stay out there a while, putting distance between them, between that word and what it might mean. Clara understood. Some things were too precious to risk unwanting. Some boundaries protected more than they divided. But understanding didn't stop the ache in her chest or the memory of his hands covering hers. It didn't erase that word that hung between them now like a bridge neither dared to cross. Everything. She prepared for bed, knowing sleep would be elusive. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, she'd stood her ground. She'd spoken her truth. And Wyatt Calder, the man who saw everything in her, had not looked away. That would have to be enough. For now. The night after McGraw's visit stretched long and sleepless. Clara heard every creak of the house, every whistle of wind through the gaps in the walls. When dawn finally came, she was already up. Fire stoked, coffee brewing. The men filed in quieter than usual, nobody quite meeting her eyes. Except Tommy. He set down a handful of early wildflowers by her workspace. Thought these might brighten the place, he mumbled, then fled to his seat. Thank you, Tommy. Her voice came out thick. They're lovely. Breakfast passed in relative silence until Hank cleared his throat. About last night, Mrs. Wynne. What McGraw said was true, partly. Clara kept her hand steady as she poured coffee. I was desperate when I came here. Mr. Calder helped me. That's all anyone needs to know. That's not what I meant. Hank looked uncomfortable. I meant to say McGraw's a snake who'd sell his mother for drinking money. Nobody here pays mind to his words. Hear, hear, Red added. Man's been spreading lies since he learned to talk. The others murmured agreement. Clara felt something ease in her chest. These men, rough as they were, had chosen their side, and it was hers. Wyatt came in last, as always, but instead of taking his usual seat, he remained standing. I'll be gone for a few days, taking some horses to Fort Laramie. Hank's in charge. When do you leave? Clara asked, trying to sound casual. Hour or so. He wouldn't quite look at her. Make sure the men don't burn the place down. He left without eating. Clara watched through the window as he saddled his horse, movements sharp with some emotion she couldn't name. When he rode out, leading a string of horses, she felt his absence like a missing tooth. That night, unable to sleep again, Clara found herself on the porch steps. The night was clear, stars scattered like spilled salt across the sky. She wrapped her shawl tighter and tried not to think about Wyatt camping somewhere under these same stars. Can't sleep either. She jumped. Hank stood in the doorway, pipe in hand. Sorry, didn't mean to disturb anyone. You didn't. He settled beside her, a respectful distance away. Mind if I smoke? She shook her head. They sat in companionable silence while he lit his pipe. The tobacco smell was oddly comforting. Known Wyatt 8 years, Hank said eventually. Never seen him like this. Like what? Torn up. Man's got more self-control than anyone I know, but McGraw rattled him good. McGraw was talking about his sister. That would rattle anyone. Hank puffed his pipe. Partly that, but mostly he was mad about what McGraw said about you, what he implied. He glanced at her. Wyatt's protective of people he, cares about. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. He's a good employer. That what you think, that he's just being a good employer? What else can I think? He made it clear. He made it clear he won't take advantage. There's a difference between that and not caring. Hank knocked his pipe against the step. His sister, Mary, that foreman. He was her employer too. Wyatt found her body, found the note she left, saying she was ruined, worthless. Clara's eyes burned. He told me some of it. Did he tell you he tracked down that foreman, beat him within an inch of his life, would have killed him if I hadn't pulled him off? Hank shook his head. Wyatt blamed himself. Said he should have seen it, should have protected her, made himself a promise that he'd never put a woman in that position, never blur the lines between employer and anything else. So he keeps his distance. He tries, but you've got under his skin. Mrs. Wynne, any fool can see it. Hank stood. Just thought you should know it's not about you not being good enough. It's about him thinking he's protecting you. He went inside, leaving Clara alone with the stars and the ache in her chest. 3 days. Wyatt would be gone 3 days. She could use that time to think, to decide what, if anything, to do about these feelings that grew stronger despite every sensible reason to ignore them. The second night of Wyatt's absence, trouble came in the form of 2 drifters. They rode up at dusk, asking for food and a place to sleep. Hank was polite but firm they could water their horses and move on. Now that's not neighborly, the taller one said. His eyes found Clara in the kitchen doorway. Especially when you've got such pretty company. The lady's not company, Red said, hand casual on his gun. She's our cook, and she's under our protection. Protection, the shorter drifter laughed. Heard in town you've got Wyatt Calder's woman out here, the one who tried to sell herself. Figured she might be looking for better offers. Clara stepped onto the porch before anyone could respond. You heard wrong. I work here, nothing more. And we're not hiring. The tall one dismounted, moving closer. Maybe you just haven't heard the right offer yet. Back on your horse, Hank ordered. Now! Or what you'll shoot us for being friendly. No, Clara said quietly. But I might. She'd brought the shotgun from the kitchen, held it steady despite her racing heart. The drifters froze. "You wouldn't," the tall one said, but uncertainty colored his voice. "I've defended myself before. I'll do it again." She cocked the gun. "Your choice. Leave now with your pride bruised, or leave later with your backsides full of buckshot." Tommy and the others had spread out, hands on weapons. The message was clear. Clara wasn't alone. The drifters backed toward their horses, hands raised. "No need for violence. We're going." They rode off quick, dust rising in the fading light. Clara lowered the shotgun, her hands finally trembling. "Where'd you learn to handle a scattergun?" Red asked. Impressed. "My father. He said a woman alone should know how to discourage unwanted attention." She managed a shaky smile. "Guess he was right." "Damn right he was right," Hank said. "You did good. Mrs. Win. Real good." That night, the men insisted on taking turns keeping watch. Clara protested it wasn't necessary, but secretly she was grateful. The drifters had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Not their words she'd heard worse, but the casual assumption that she was available, for sale, just because of a story they'd heard. She was dozing in her bed when hoofbeats woke her. Her heart raced the drifters back, but then she heard Tommy's excited voice. "Mr. Calder's back." Clara forced herself to stay put. It was near midnight. He'd be tired, wanting only his bed. But she heard him asking Hank something, heard her name, heard footsteps approaching her door. A soft knock. "Clara, you awake?" She sat up, pulled her shawl around her shoulders. "Come in." He opened the door but stayed on the threshold. In the moonlight, she could see trail dust on his clothes, exhaustion in the line of his shoulders. "Hank told me what happened. The drifters." "It's fine. We handled it." "You handled it. With my shotgun." Something like pride flickered in his eyes. "Hank said you were magnificent." Heat climbed her cheeks. "I was scared." "Being scared and doing what needs done anyway, that's courage." He shifted, still not entering. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. You can't always be here, and I can't always need protecting." She met his eyes. "That's not fair to either of us." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're right, it's not." He straightened. "I'll let you rest. Just needed to see you were all right." "Wyatt." He paused at his name. "Did you really ride through the night to get back?" "Heard in Fort Laramie about drifters heading this way. Thought." He shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I thought. It matters to me." They stared at each other across the threshold. So much unspoken, so much held back by invisible lines neither seemed able to cross. "Sleep well, Clara," he said finally. "You too." But after he left, sleep was impossible. He'd ridden through the night because he'd heard about danger, because despite all his careful distance, all his proper boundaries, he'd needed to see for himself that she was safe. Clara touched the wooden horse on her windowsill. Such a careful man, trying so hard to do the right thing, keeping her at arm's length to protect her reputation, her position, her dignity, not understanding that his distance was its own kind of pain. Through the thin wall, she could hear him moving in his room, probably cleaning up from the trail, trying to wash away 3 days of dust and worry. She wondered if he was thinking of her, if he lay awake like she did, fighting wants that had no proper outlet. The night deepened. Eventually, exhaustion won, and Clara slept. She dreamed of starlight and shotguns, of careful hands and careless words, of a man who rode through darkness just to make sure she was safe. When morning came, bringing with it the usual routine of breakfast and chores, Wyatt was back in his chair, controlled and distant as always. But when he thanked her for the coffee, his fingers brushed hers on the cup, and when she set down his plate, he murmured, magnificent, so low only she could hear. Small rebellions against the boundaries he'd set, tiny cracks in the wall of propriety between them. Clara hid her smile and went about her work. Spring was coming stronger every day, Change rode on the wind that never stopped blowing. And sometimes, walls that protected could also imprison. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing wasn't crossing lines, but pretending they didn't long to be crossed. She'd stood her ground against drifters with a shotgun. Maybe, when the time was right, she'd find the courage to stand her ground against the careful distance of a good man too afraid of repeating history to see that some stories could end differently. For now, she had the stolen glances, brushed fingers, a word murmured like a prayer, small things, but in a place where gestures mattered more than words. They felt like promises. Spring was coming, and with it, perhaps, the courage to want more than safety, to risk the heart she'd guarded as carefully as he guarded his. But that was tomorrow's battle. Today, she had 8 hungry cowboys to feed and a reputation to maintain. Today, she was Clara Wynne, cook and shotgun handler, a woman who'd earned her place through grit and grace. Everything else, the wants, the maybes, the almosts, would have to wait. The spring rains came sudden and fierce, turning the Wyoming plains into a sea of mud. Clara woke to the sound of water where water shouldn't be dripping through the kitchen ceiling, pooling on her floor. She scrambled up, moving pots and dishes to safety, but the damage was spreading fast. Rivers rising. Tommy burst through the door, soaked through. "Mister, Calder says we need to move the horses to higher ground." Clara threw on her cloak and followed him into the storm. The usually calm creek that ran behind the ranch had become a torrent, brown water churning with debris. The men were already working, leading nervous horses from the lower corrals. "Clara, get back inside," Wyatt shouted over the rain. He was knee-deep in muddy water, fighting to keep a young mare calm. "The kitchen's flooding anyway." She grabbed a rope. "Tell me what to do." For once, he didn't argue. "Help Tommy with the chickens. Coop's about to go under." She slogged through the mud, skirts heavy with water, and helped Tommy chase squawking chickens to the barn loft. By the time they'd saved most of the birds, she was soaked to the skin and shivering. The next hours blurred together, moving feed sacks, helping drive cattle to higher pasture, filling sandbags when the water kept rising. Clara worked alongside the men, her hands raw from wet rope, her back aching from lifting. "Watch out!" Red's warning came too late. A surge of water knocked Clara off her feet, current pulling her toward the swollen creek. She grabbed for anything solid, found nothing but mud. Then Wyatt's hand closed on her arm, hauling her back. They went down together in the mud, him taking the brunt of the fall, arms tight around her as they rolled away from the water's edge. For a moment they lay there, breathing hard, her back pressed against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering. Or maybe that was hers. "You hurt." His voice was rough in her ear. "No. No." But he didn't let go. Not right away. "Damn it, Clara! You could have been swept away." "But I wasn't." She turned in his arms, muddy face inches from his. "You caught me." Something flickered in his eyes, fear, relief, and something else that made her breath catch. Then Hank was there, pulling them up, and the moment shattered. They worked until dark. When the rain finally eased, the water had crested just short of the main house, though the bunkhouse had taken damage. Exhausted, muddy, and cold. Everyone gathered in the kitchen, the driest building left. Clara built up the fire and started coffee with shaking hands. Her wet clothes clung uncomfortable, but there was no privacy to change, no energy to care. She'd torn her skirt in 3 places, her hair hung in muddy strings, and somewhere she'd lost a shoe. "Here." Wyatt draped a blanket around her shoulders. "You're shivering." "So are you." Without thinking, she pulled the blanket wider, inviting him to share. He hesitated, then sat beside her on the bench, the blanket covering them both. It was the closest they'd been since that morning with the stew pot. She could smell rain and mud and horse, could feel the heat of him starting to warm her side. Around them, the men steamed by the fire, sharing quiet conversation and coffee, but Clara felt separate from it all, aware only of Wyatt's shoulder touching hers. "That was brave today," he said quiet. "Foolish, but brave." "Seems to be my way." She pulled the blanket tighter. "Can't seem to help myself when there's trouble." "I've noticed." His hand found hers under the blanket, fingers threading through hers, hidden from view, private as a secret. "Thank you. We'd have lost more without your help." She squeezed his fingers, saying with touch what she couldn't with words. They sat that way while the coffee heated, while the men dozed where they sat, while the rain gentled to drizzle outside. "I should check the barn," he said finally, but didn't move. "I should start supper." But she didn't move either. "Clara." He turned to look at her, and they were too close, inches becoming nothing. His free hand came up, thumb brushing mud from her cheek with infinite care. "Mr. Calder." Tommy stumbled in from checking the creek. "Water's dropping fast. Looks like the worst is over." Wyatt pulled back, hand leaving her face but keeping hold of her fingers for one more heartbeat before letting go. "Good. We'll start cleanup at first light." He rose, leaving her cold despite the blanket. But before he headed to the barn, he touched her shoulder. A promise. Maybe, or an apology. Clara couldn't tell which. The night stretched long. She dozed fitfully in the kitchen chair, starting awake whenever the wind hit hard. Sometimes she found Wyatt watching her from across the room, his expression unreadable in the dying firelight. Sometimes she pretended to sleep just to avoid the weight of that gaze. Dawn came pale and watery. The men stumbled out to survey the damaged fences down, the chicken coop destroyed, feed stores soaked, but the building stood. The livestock survived, and everyone was whole. It could have been much worse. Clara made breakfast from whatever stayed dry, ignoring her exhaustion and the bruises blooming across her arms from the fall. She'd changed into dry clothes, but felt the mud still ground into her skin, her hair. "Soon as we get the worst cleaned up, you should rest," Wyatt said, accepting coffee. His hand was bandaged. When had he heard it? "Your hand?" "Cut it on some fencing. It's nothing." He flexed his fingers, proving they worked. "You look ready to drop." "Flattery will get you nowhere, Mr. Calder." A smile ghosted across his face. "Wasn't flattery, was worry." Before she could respond, he was gone, organizing the men for repair work. Clara watched through the window as they labored in the mud, rebuilding what the water had taken. Her body ached to help, but her legs wouldn't hold her much longer. She was swaying over the dishes when strong arms lifted her. "Wyatt, put me down." "No." He carried her to her bed, set her down gentle. "You've done enough, more than enough. Rest. The men need lunch. The men can make do with cold biscuits for once." He pulled her muddy boots off, covered her with the quilt. "Sleep, Clara. That's an order." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. The last thing she felt was his hand smoothing hair back from her face, his voice murmuring something too soft to catch. When she woke, afternoon shadows slanted through the window. Someone Wyatt had left fresh water and a clean towel. She washed the worst of the mud away, braided her hair neat, and ventured out to find the men still working. "There's our hero," Red called out. "Feeling better?" "I'm no hero, just did what needed doing." "That's generally what heroes say," Hank observed. "Wyatt, tell her she's a hero so she'll believe it." Wyatt looked up from the fence he was mending. His eyes found hers across the muddy yard, and something in his expression made her chest tight. "She knows what she is," he said simply. "Don't need me to tell her." But that night, after the men had eaten and retired to their damaged bunkhouse, he lingered again. Clara was treating the cuts on her hands with salve when he approached. "Let me." He took the tin from her, began spreading salve with careful fingers. "You scared me today." "I scared myself." She watched him work, gentle with her damaged hands. "But I'd do it again. This is my home too now. Worth fighting for." His hand stilled on hers. "Is it your home?" "You tell me." She met his eyes. "Am I just the cook here, or am I something more?" The question hung between them, heavy as the blanket they'd shared. Wyatt set down the salve, took her face in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, and she could see him fighting himself, wanting and restraint at war in his gray eyes. "You're everything," he said, echoing his word from that night with McGraw. "But we can't." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Because you're afraid of becoming that foreman. Because you think wanting me means disrespecting me. Because you deserve better than gossip and assumptions. Because you've worked too hard to build something here for me to ruin it with my wants." Clara covered his hands with hers, held them against her face. "What if I want to be ruined? What if I'm tired of being protected from feelings that go both ways?" He made a sound like pain. "Clara!" "I'm not your sister, Wyatt. I'm not some innocent girl being taken advantage of. I'm a grown woman who knows her own mind. And my mind, my heart, they're made up." For a moment, she thought he'd kiss her, his face lowered toward hers, his breath warm on her lips. Then voices approached some of the men coming to check on something, and he pulled away. "This conversation isn't over," he said roughly. "No," she agreed. "It's not." He left her there with her treated hands and a racing heart. Through the window, she watched him direct the men, steady and controlled as always. But she'd felt him tremble when he held her face. She'd seen the want that matched her own. The spring floods had washed away more than fences and chicken coops. They'd washed away some of the careful distance between them, left them muddy and truthful and too tired to pretend. Clara cleaned up the medical supplies, prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring more cleanup, more rebuilding. But something had shifted today, fundamental as the creek changing course. She'd fought alongside him to save what they'd built. She'd lain in his arms in the mud, felt his heart race with the fear of losing her. And tonight, finally, she'd spoken the truth that had been growing since a cold night in a saloon when he'd said no and given her dignity back. The conversation wasn't over, but it had finally, truly begun. The days after the flood carried a different weight. Clara felt it in the way Wyatt's eyes lingered on her across the breakfast table. In the careful distance he kept even as that distance seemed physically painful to maintain. They'd spoken truths in the aftermath of mud and fear, but morning light had brought back all the reasons those truths were dangerous. Still, something had shifted. When their hands brushed passing plates, neither pulled away quite as fast. When she brought him coffee during the long days of repair work, he'd murmur "thank you" in a voice that said more. Small rebellions against the boundaries that still stood between them. It was a week later, the ranch mostly put back together, when Wyatt found her in the garden plot she'd started behind the kitchen. She was planting seeds, beans, squash, things that might survive Wyoming's temperamental weather. "Optimistic," he said, crouching beside her. "Hopeful." She pressed seeds into dark soil. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Optimism expects good things. Hope just refuses to give up on the possibility." She glanced at him. "I'm good at not giving up." "I've noticed." He helped her cover the seeds, their hands working the same earth. "Clara, we need to talk. About what happens next, about..." He sat back on his heels. "I've been offered a contract to supply beef to the railroad camps. Good money, but it means being gone. Maybe months." Her hand stilled. "When?" 2 weeks after spring roundup. He watched her face. "Hank can run things here. The men know their work. You'd be alone." The word tasted bitter. "Safe," he corrected. "Away from gossip, from speculation. When I come back, you'll be established, respectable, your position secure." Clara stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "Is that what you want to leave?" What I want doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. She faced him, chin up. You're talking about running away. I'm talking about protecting your reputation. From what? From people thinking we care for each other. Her voice rose. Let them think it. I'm tired of being protected. Wyatt, I'm tired of distances and boundaries and pretending I don't. She stopped, breathing hard. He stood too, a foot of space between them that felt like miles. Don't what? His voice was rough. Don't love you. The words hung in the afternoon air. There, I said it. I love you. Not because you saved me, not from gratitude or desperation. I love your careful hands and your stubborn honor in the way you talk to horses. I love how you trust me to stand beside you in floods and face down drifters with shotguns. I love. He kissed her, crossed that careful distance in one stride, and caught her face in his hands and kissed her like a drowning man finding air. She made a sound surprise, relief, joy, and kissed him back, her dirty hands fisting in his shirt. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteady, he rested his forehead against hers. Clara, don't. She kept her eyes closed. Don't tell me why this is wrong. Don't explain about propriety and reputation. Just let me have this moment. I was going to say I love you too. Her eyes flew open. He was smiling, that rare, real smile that transformed his weathered face. Have for a while now, he continued. Probably since you told McGraw off. Maybe since you walked into that saloon ready to sell yourself and I saw how much it cost you. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Definitely since you stood in this kitchen and made it home. Then stay. She covered his hands with hers. Don't go to the railroad camps. Stay. If I stay, people will talk. People already talk. McGraw saw to that. She pulled back enough to see his face fully. I'm not ashamed of loving you. Are you ashamed of loving me? Never. The word came fierce. But you've worked so hard to build something here. We've built something. Together. And what we've built is strong enough to weather more than floods. She smiled. Tremulous but real. Besides, I faced down drifters with a shotgun. I think I can handle a few gossiping townspeople. He laughed, surprising them both. That's true enough. His hand slid to her shoulders. You sure about this? About us, once we go down this path? There's no going back. I know. Clara stepped closer, eliminating the last careful inches between them. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. This time when he kissed her, it was softer, deeper. A promise rather than a desperate grab at something forbidden. Her arms went around his neck, and she felt him smile against her lips. The men are going to be insufferable, he murmured. Hank's been lecturing me for weeks about wasting time. Tommy will probably write poetry. Red will play that damn harmonica even more. And I'll keep cooking their meals and washing their dishes and pretending I don't notice them grinning like fools. She pulled back to look at him. I want to keep working. Wyatt, this job, it matters to me. I know, and you're the best cook we've ever had. I'd be a fool to lose you to propriety. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. But things will change. You know that. Things have been changing since the day I arrived. She caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek. The only difference is now we're choosing the change instead of fighting it. Footsteps approached Tommy. By the sound of the whistling, Wyatt stepped back to a proper distance, but kept hold of her hand. Mrs. Win Mr. Calder. Tommy rounded the corner and skidded to a stop, taking in their joined hands, their faces probably still soft from kissing. His eyes went wide. Hank sent me to, but I can come back. What did Hank want? Wyatt asked, calm as if holding Clara's hand was perfectly normal. New horses, spotted coming over the rise, about 6 of them, with riders. Tommy kept staring at their hands. Are you two? Yes, Clara said simply. We are. Tommy's grin could have lit the ranch for a week. "Wait till I tell Red he owes me $2. He ran off before either could respond. Clara looked at Wyatt. "They were betting." "Probably. Cowboys bet on everything." He squeezed her hand. "We should see about those riders." But he didn't let go as they walked toward the front of the house, and when the riders proved to be horse traders just passing through, he stood close enough that their shoulders touched, claiming her publicly in that small way. The traders didn't stay long, but Clara saw how they looked at her, at Wyatt, at the careful distance between them that wasn't quite distant enough. One of them would carry the story to town, probably. The respectable widow Wynne and the rancher who'd saved her. Another story to add to the ones McGraw had spread. But as Clara served coffee to the men that night, as she felt Wyatt's eyes following her with open warmth now instead of hidden longing, she found she didn't care. Let them talk. She'd survived worse than gossip. "So," Hank said conversationally, "you two finally figured it out." "Nothing to figure," Wyatt replied. "Just decided to stop fighting the obvious." "About damn time." Red pulled out his harmonica. "This calls for a celebration song." As Red played something almost romantic, or as romantic as a cowboy's harmonica could get, Clara caught Wyatt's eye. He smiled. That full smile she was still learning. And she knew they'd made the right choice. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be gossip to weather, boundaries to navigate, a relationship to build on something more solid than stolen glances. The spring roundup still loomed, though she suspected the railroad camps would have to find another beef supplier. But tonight, in her kitchen with her roughneck family of cowboys, with the man she loved finally free to look at her like she was precious, Clara felt wealthy beyond measure. She'd come here with nothing, ready to sell the last piece of herself for bread and shelter. Instead, she'd found work that mattered, men who'd become brothers, and a love that had grown slow and steady as spring wheat. And the best part, she hadn't had to sell anything. Everything she'd gained, she'd earned. Everything she'd given freely, including her heart to a careful man who'd waited patiently for her to be ready to give it. "Play something happier. Red," she called out, "something fitting for a new beginning." Red obliged with a lively tune that had Tommy tapping his feet and even stern Hank smiling. Wyatt crossed to where she stood by the stove, slipped an arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. "No regrets?" he asked, soft in her ear. "None." She leaned into his solid warmth. "You... only that I waited so long." He pressed a kiss to her temple, gentle and claiming all at once. "But then, the best things are worth waiting for." Clara smiled and swayed a little to Red's music, there in her kitchen with her love, surrounded by the family they'd built from necessity and choice and the simple human need to belong somewhere. She was home, really, truly home, and that was worth more than all the gold in California, all the cattle in Texas, all the gossip in Wyoming. That was worth everything. May had dressed the prairie in wildflowers, and Clara stood in her garden admiring the green shoots pushing through dark soil. 3 months since that desperate night in Millbrook. 3 months that had changed everything. The kitchen door opened, and she turned to find Wyatt watching her with that look that still made her breath catch soft and sure and wondering, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "Supper's not for an hour," she said. "Didn't come for supper." He crossed to her, pulled her close without hesitation now. The careful distance was gone, replaced by easy affection that the men had grown used to. "Came for you." She smiled against his chest. "The men will talk." "Let them. They've got money on when I'll finally propose anyway." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Wyatt Calder, are you telling me our boys are betting on our future? Tommy's got his money on before the 4th of July. Red thinks I'll wait till fall." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, that simple gesture still making her shiver. "Hank says I'm fool enough to wait till Christmas." "And what do you say?" Instead of answering, he led her to the porch steps, sat and pulled her down beside him. The evening was warm, golden light making everything soft. From the bunkhouse came the sound of Red's harmonica, Tommy's laughter, the comfortable noise of home. "I've been thinking," Wyatt began, "about that night in the saloon." Clara tensed. They'd avoided talking about it directly, though it hung between them sometimes the shadow of what might have been. "You were ready to give up everything," he continued. "Ready to sell the only thing you thought had value." His hand found hers. "Do you know what I saw when you walked in that night? A desperate woman. A warrior." He turned to face her fully. Someone who'd survived loss and betrayal and hunger. Someone who'd walked through snow and cold and fear, and still had enough fight left to walk into that saloon and face whatever came. His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You weren't selling yourself, Clara. You were fighting the only way you knew how." Her eyes burned. "I was so scared." "I know, but you didn't let fear win." He brought her hand to his lips. "And when I said no, when I offered you work instead, you could have been angry, ashamed, too proud to accept. But you took the chance. You came here and made this place home, made us all better for knowing you. You saved me." "No," his voice was firm. "You saved yourself. I just held the door open." Clara leaned into him, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. "That first night here, sleeping in the barn, I kept waiting for you to change your mind, to demand payment for your kindness. And I kept waiting for you to run. This life isn't easy. The isolation, the work, the rough men and rough ways." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "But you didn't just stay. You thrived. You stood up to McGraw, faced down drifters, worked beside us in the flood. You became the heart of this place." "Our place," she corrected. "Yes." He shifted, pulled something from his pocket. "Which is why I want to make it official." Clara's heart stuttered as he opened his hand. Not a ring, they were too far from any jeweler for that. Instead, a key lay on his palm, old iron, worn smooth. "It's to the house," he said. "Not just the kitchen, the whole house. Your house, if you'll have it. If you'll have me." He met her eyes, steady and sure. "I'm not good with pretty words, Clara, but I promise you'll never doubt your worth again. Never wonder if you're wanted. Never have to bargain for bread or shelter or dignity. Wyatt, marry me." The words came simple, direct. "Not because you need protection or security, not because people talk, but because I love you. Because this place isn't home without you in it. Because—" She kissed him, cutting off whatever else he might have said. When they broke apart, both smiling, she took the key from his hand. "Yes," she said. "Yes to the house. Yes to the life. Yes to you. Yes to all of it." He let out a breath like he'd been holding it for months. Maybe he had. "Tommy's going to be impossible," he said. "He'll think he's won the bet." "Let him. He's a good boy." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "They all are, in their way. Our rough-edged family." Speaking of family, Wyatt's arm tightened around her. "There'll be children. God willing, this place will be loud with them someday." Clara smiled at the thought. "Boys who'll learn to gentle horses from their father. Girls who'll learn to stand strong from their mother. And all of them will know they're valued. That worth isn't something you sell or trade or lose." He turned the key in her hand so it caught the light. "It's something you are." The supper bell rang Tommy's enthusiasm carrying across the yard. Clara stood, pulled Wyatt up with her. "Come on, future husband. Let's go tell our boys they'll need to find a new cook soon." "Why, you're not leaving?" "No, but I'll be too busy being the lady of the house to cook for a bunch of cowboys." She grinned at his expression. "I'm joking. I'll always cook for our boys. It's what I do. It's part of who I am here." "Good, because I think they'd mutiny if you stopped feeding them." They walked hand in hand to the kitchen, where the men were already gathering. Tommy took one look at their faces and whooped loud enough to scare the horses.
I knew it before July Red. Pay up.
Now hold on, Red protested.
He hasn't actually proposed yet.
Clara held up the key.
He has.
The kitchen erupted in cheers, backslapping, Red's harmonica playing something that might have been a wedding march. Hank produced a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, and even Wyatt accepted a glass for the toast. To Mrs. Wynne, Hank raised his glass. Soon to be Mrs. Calder, the woman who tamed our boss and taught us all that beans don't have to taste like boiled leather.
To the best damn cook in Wyoming,
Red added, and the only woman brave enough to take on Wyatt's moods.
To family,
Tommy said, young face sincere.
Because that's what we are now, right? A real family.
Yes, Clara said, tears threatening.
That's exactly what we are.
They drank and laughed, and Red played while Tommy attempted to dance. And in the middle of it all, Clara stood in her kitchen, truly hers now, and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. A cold night in February. She'd been ready to sell her dignity for bread. She'd thought it was all she had left to offer. But Wyatt had seen something else, something more. He'd offered her work, purpose, respect, and in earning those things, she'd found so much more. Love, home, family. A future stretching out like the prairie itself, vast and challenging and beautiful. No regrets, Wyatt asked, finding her in a quiet moment while the others celebrated. None. She touched the key in her pocket, solid and real as the life they'd built. You.
Only one.
He pulled her close.
I should have given you that key sooner.
No, Clara said. You gave it to me exactly when I was ready to receive it, when I knew my own worth well enough to accept it as an equal, not as charity. He kissed her then, there in her kitchen with their cowboys cheering and the sunset painting everything gold, and Clara knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because a man had saved her, not because she'd found shelter from the storm, but because she'd walked through fire and come out stronger, because she'd learned that dignity couldn't be sold, only given away, because she'd discovered that sometimes the best trades were the ones you didn't make. She'd offered her first night as a bargain to a stranger in a saloon. He'd said no, that it wasn't something you just traded away. He'd been right. Some things were too precious for bargaining. Some things like love, like respect, like the key to a house that had become home, were only meaningful when given freely, received gratefully, and treasured always. The celebration continued around them, their makeshift family rejoicing in their happiness, and Clara Wynne, soon to be Clara Calder, knew she was the wealthiest woman in Wyoming, not in gold or cattle or land, but in the things that truly mattered. She was loved, she was valued, she was home, and that was worth everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and Wyatt's journey. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more listeners discover this story. Your support means everything. Until next time, partners.